Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We're just detailing the enormity, the crime, the monstrosity of the Federal Reserve's bailout of financial parasites, zombie bankers, hedge fund hyenas, asset strippers of every ilk were welcome. But anybody doing anything productive, if you were manufacturing cars or computers or a vaccine, you were out of luck, because ultimately when you say General Electric, you're talking GE Capital and similarly so on down the line. So Goldman Sachs lied. They did borrow. Morgan Stanley, of course, never even tried to lie. GE Capital tapped the Fed for $2.3 billion on October 27th, 2008. And then we get the money market funds. Remember that when the money markets, two of them broke the buck during that fateful week of September 15th to 19th, 2008. That was when the Kanjorski moment arrived. The Kanjorski moment was the one announced or revealed by Kanjorski that at about midday on October, it's Thursday, September 18th, 2008, the estimate from the Treasury of the Federal Reserve was that about $5 trillion was about to rush out of the U.S. banking system, out of the dollar. It would have been the panic rush for the exits from the dollar system, and it would have brought down the dollar. It would have been a loss of 20, 30, 40% of the dollar value on one day. Remember, the overall turnover in the U.S. Treasury market on any given day is about $1 trillion. And here we're talking about $5 trillion piling in on the sell side alone. That probably would have wrecked the U.S. Treasury market, which is the thing that keeps this whole thing going. So at that Kanjorski point, that's the height of the crisis, and all of these people were piling in to get loans. Therefore, what was done was to back up money market companies, money market fund companies. Now, these are often money market mutual fund companies, and this is companies with assets, so-called assets, of $2.4 trillion. This includes BlackRock, Fidelity Investment, the largest retail mutual fund company, and the Dreyfus Corporation. Remember the lion going out of the Wall Street subway? All right, Dreyfus. They were also bailed out by the federal government. But now here we get into the really unbelievable stuff. Hedge funds. In other words, purely speculative, outrageous bandit institutions. And indeed, these are the hedge funds. Remember, the hedge fund wolf pack was what took down Lehman Brothers. It's what took down Bear Stearns, too. These companies, of course, got into trouble. They were technically bankrupt, technically insolvent. But the way that this exploded and became a public fact in the case of both Bear and Lehman was that hedge funds would begin to attack. The hedge funds would often pull their own accounts out of these institutions. They would short the stock. They would attack them with credit default swaps on their bonds and all sorts of other tricks that could be pulled. And then, once the panic gets rolling, right, once this whole thing explodes in their faces, they rush to the government, these wonderful paladins of the free market. And Larry Kudlow gets on there and says, free market capitalism is the way to go. Well, let's look at this. Let's look in particular at another one. So far we were talking about the TAF, right, the Term Auction Facility. Well, now let's talk about the TALF, T-A-L-F. This is different. Term Asset-Backed Securities Loan Facility. And out of that they get TALF. Anyway, Term Asset-Backed Securities Loan Facility, TALF. And this was going from March of 2009 until June of 10. So they were able to bail out. They chose to bail out Magnetar Capital, Tricadia Capital, Front Point Partners. They've come out with 177 borrowers in this facility with $71 billion in loans. You notice the amount is not as big. It's not as big as what was going even to one of the smaller recipients on the TAF, right? It's less than Dexia, for example, but still, $71 billion for these sociopathic hedge funds. Let's talk about some others. TALF borrowers also included debt investors such as Angelo Gordon and Company, Seguler Guff and Company, California Public Employees Retirement System. Now, this, I think you could make an argument for the public interest, but how about this one? John Paulson, whose hedge fund firm, Paulson and Company, made large profits betting against subprime mortgages. And this is the guy who was part of that Abacus case, right? Remember the case of the Goldman Sachs collateralized debt obligation, a big scandal earlier the year with Lloyd Blankfein testifying in front of Congress. Paulson was the guy who designed the CDO to go bankrupt, loaded it with dubious assets, and allowed Goldman then to sell it to suckers and short it and bet against it at the same time. So this is unbelievable because Paulson is a notorious bear. He's one of the people who attacked Lehman Brothers along with Einhorn, and he then, once the crisis threatened to destroy him, he runs to the government and demands protection from the government, of course, that he's always attacking as interference with the free market. Outrageous interference with the free market. One West Bank of Pasadena, California. Now, you may not know One West, but this is IndyMac. This is the banking failure, the banking giant, because it was a big one, that blew in the summer of 2008. We're not talking about Countrywide Bank that blew in August of 2007 with panic runs, but we're talking now the summer of 2008. IndyMac, this was the direct precursor to the fall of Lehman and the big conflagration in Wall Street. Let's also not forget Atlanta. Angel Oak Capital Advisors, LLC, says that they somehow they were somehow peripherally involved. So how about that list? Let's see if we have something else here. We've got Goldman Sachs, of course, we've mentioned, Morgan Stanley, General Electric. Oh, how about this? Harley Davidson, those great gruff cultural populists over there. My hog, my sickle. Well, Harley Davidson cashed in on Fed lending under exigent circumstances. How about another facility? So far we've done TAF, we've done TALF. Let's do AMLF, Asset-Backed Commercial Paper Money Market Mutual Fund Liquidity Facility. I repeat, Asset-Backed Commercial Paper Money Market Mutual Fund Liquidity Facility. You never heard about that from Limbaugh, did you? He didn't tell you it was going on. Maybe Limbaugh also cashed in. But we're told, the buck stops here, reserve funds, this is a financial institution, a money market fund. Reserve fund got $20 billion approximately in lending. J.P. Morgan, out of this particular fund, $17.7 billion. Columbia Funds got $15.1 billion. BlackRock, we've mentioned, I think, in another fund context, $11.7 billion. Morgan Stanley comes in here with about $10 billion, and Goldman Sachs comes in here with about $9 billion. So you're beginning to get the idea. And again, it's $3.3 trillion altogether. Now, we've only mentioned three of these funds, and you're going to see the impossibility of giving an adequate picture of the magnitude of this archipelago of crime and extortion and banditry. Let's go through a list in alphabetical order, I think, or maybe not, of Federal Reserve credit and liquidity facilities that were operating during the crisis of 08, 09, and into 2010. We have the Agency Mortgage-Backed Securities Purchase Program. Agency Mortgage-Backed Securities Purchase Program. This essentially is a way to buy toxic assets, to buy CDOs and warehouse them and prevent them from destroying these speculative financial institutions. We've got the central bank liquidity swap lines. We'll come back to that in just a minute. More foreign banks, this time foreign central banks. And we'll be with you back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.